why music and not other forms of art? Well, I would consider myself a musician first and foremost, although my practice has expanded in the last 5 years, and so I have kind of an expanded idea of what music is or what music can be. So in terms of other forms of art, I'm interested in visual art, and I'm interested in kind of bringing a visuality to sound and to music. And I'm interested in this idea of kind of an expanded form of music. But I love music in all its forms, so there's nothing sort of judgmental in that attitude. But there is something about this idea of opening music up and the possibilities that are available within these kinds of doorways. What is for you the true meaning of music? Well, I think that there's this idea that music has a potential to describe things and experiences and ways of being that aren't available through words. This is kind of a romantic notion that music can, express something or capture something that is uncapturable by language. And in many ways, I think that is a sort of a truth for me in my relationship to music. It's something that I can turn to and that I can sort of draw from in a way that I can't draw from language or from conversation. So it creates a kind of a parallel world that draws from this world and is in relationship to our world, but is this sort of kind of internal space in its own way. And I just think that that's an important place for me to go as a musician. When did you start to realize music was your career? Well, I never really thought of music as my career in a way that I wanted to use music to make money or to generate income. I mean, the only sort of reason that I've kind of made music a career, or at least turned it into a career, is by staying true to the music and kind of focusing on the aspects of it that are not about making money and are about the art form. And at the same time, I can be totally honest and say that I know that in order to focus on music and in order to have time to make music and in order to be able to invest myself in my work, there has to be some kind of compensation for it career-wise. So it's a kind of a negotiation in a way, I suppose, between music and the world, in the sense that to make music and have the time to do it, you have to, make money from it in some way or have some other form of income. But in my case, that always felt like it would be a distraction from making the work. So I hope that's answer enough. I mean, they're interrelated, but I've found that if I don't stay true to the music and true to the art of it, then any kind of career wouldn't be possible for me. How could you describe your current musical direction and how it's changed over the last years? My current musical direction is a kind of an expanded version of my earlier work. My work comes out of the recording studio. I, in many ways, am the sort of the bedrock of my musicality is from the studio, and treating this recording studio as a compositional tool, as a place to make and structure and build pieces. In the last few years, 4 or 5 years, I've become increasingly interested in sort of interfacing these gestures, these compositional processes of the recording studio, and drawing them out of the studio and into the physicality of the world. This is either through installation works or performance works, which create some kind of dialogue between the sort of the closed interior space of the recording studio and the wide open exterior space of the world in all of its complexity. So a lot of my work has become installation-based and performance-based. I'm still interested in recording and I still work in the studio, but I'm also interested in kind of expanding outwards from the studio. So my practice is kind of diversified and expanded, I would say, in the last years. What are you influenced by, especially when you write music? I tend to draw my inspiration from sort of the materiality of the object or the instrument that I'm working with. I've done a lot of work with mechanical musical instruments, and I think part of my attraction to these instruments is that they have their own sort of identities, and that I see myself as a kind of a collaborator in a way with these objects, that I'm making some decisions and sort of informing the process, but then on the other hand, the immediacy of the material is describing its own sort of presence. And what I'm trying to do is be in dialogue with that presence and give it room to have its own sort of space, but at the same time bring myself to it so that it's really a conversation between me and the material. And that's really where I've drawn so much of my inspiration, be it from mechanical musical instruments, be it from the sounds of the world or the sound of moving through an architectural space and the acoustic changes that are possible. All of these sounds are inspirational for me. What kind of art, excluding music, fascinates you? Do you have any painters, writers, or books you particularly like? What kind of art, excluding music? Well, what immediately jumps to mind is the light and space artists of the 60s and 70s, who were kind of a group of California artists that were doing light installations. Robert Irwin and James Turrell are kind of the luminaries of that scene, but there's others. And I've really always been inspired by the kind of the beauty of their work, and also the sort of rigor, especially that Robert Irwin brings in terms of discovery and wonder and focus. And I feel a real affinity to the kind of phenomenal qualities of this work and in dealing with something as basic and direct as light. And so that's been inspirational for me. And, you know, in general, in terms of art, installation work and phenomenal kind of works are the ones that are most exciting for me. Pieces that offer a sort of an experience and have some kind of immersive quality tend to be the ones that I'm drawn to. But I'm always looking in works like this for something that isn't just about the experience, but offers some kind of meanings that move beyond just beauty. So, and I struggle in my own work to sort of create pieces that find that balance as well. What artist inspires you the most? Well, I mentioned Robert Irwin. He's a big inspiration. I've always loved the work of Steve Reich, especially this idea of kind of the tape pieces and translating these tape pieces back into performance works with live performers. I find this to be fascinating, this idea of translating these processes of the studio back into modes of physical presence. And I think in large part, Reich was an inspiration for me in terms of thinking about how to translate these gestures out of the studio and into the world. How does your creative process work? Well, I've talked a bit about this idea of negotiation, and I think really that is kind of the underpinning of what I think of when I'm making my work. I generally am trying to reach out to the world and find something that strikes me and that is of interest. That could be automated musical instruments like the player pianos and the music boxes and the organ, the theater organ at the roller rink, or it could be the revolving door, or most recently these World War II bunkers in a reclaimed outdoor prairie land. All of these things have some kind of draw for me, and I think that is sort of how I work creatively. Is I seek out and I find something that draws me, and then I try to draw back from it and create a dialogue that will create a piece. What are you listening to lately? Do you often look for new artists and new music to listen to? I've become a bit less of a kind of a cultural consumer I tend to be spending so much time working on my own work and sort of focused in my own ways that I'm not necessarily drawing from, especially from recording catalogs or recordings, MP3s and things, not as much as I used to. And I think, like I said, that a lot of that is just due to focusing on my own work and also trying to open my ears up to the environment in a wider way so that I'm kind of actively listening constantly and trying to find the music in just the sounds around me. That said, I still love traditional music and music as such. And so for instance, I've been listening a bunch to Sun Kill Moon, who's also known as the Red House Painters. And he's just a singer-songwriter, but he writes these beautiful songs, and there's such a weight to them. And I'm often drawn to music like that has some sort of resonance in an emotional way. How is your next record going to be structured? Are there going to be any surprises, guests, or anything we might be interested about? To tell you the truth, I don't have plans for a next record. I'm sure I'll make another record soon, and actually I've been thinking about it a fair amount in the last few months, but I'm not totally sure what that will develop into yet. I've kind of refocused my attention on these installation works and on these performance works, and that's really what's been kind of drawing me along, and where I've been putting my time. But I do miss just making albums and making pieces in the studio. So I think that I'm going to try to reapproach that. I sort of needed to take a break from it for a while, but I feel now that I'm kind of coming up on a period again where I'm going to be interested in going back into the studio and making recordings in the studio space. But the main project I'm working on at the moment has been a choir piece for voice in these bunkers, which are from World War II, that are laid out in this grid across the landscape at this reclaimed prairie land called Medewan. And I've been sort of orchestrating these vocal interventions in the landscape and capturing them on video. And I've already sort of done some preliminary installation work with these videos, but I'm hoping to do a larger scale piece. And so that's kind of where I've been investing my time and thought and energy. And this happens, both musically in the sense that I have performers out in the space making sounds, and they're interacting with the interiors of these bunkers, which are so reverberant, and the exterior space, which is this wide open prairie landscape that has no reflection. So I'm really interested in kind of the phenomenal differences between these interior and exterior spaces and the ways that they change and transform the voice. But I'm also interested in the landscape and all of its history and social complexity, that it has years of land use and that it's kind of socially constructed as a space, that currently it's a prairie restoration, so they're trying to return it to a sort of its earlier state. Before that it was a military landscape, and there's still remnants of that in the surface of the terrain. And before that, it was farmed by colonial agriculture, and before that, it was a Native American hunting ground. There's actually a Native American burial mound on the landscape as well. So it has this really dense history, and I'm interested in the way that can enter into a sound piece. And I essentially am working to create a dialogue with the sort of structures of this history in the same way that I've sought to create a dialogue with the immediate sort of physicality of the landscape. So that's the piece I'm working on most right now. And I don't see it as an album. I see it as a video piece. It's not meant to be listened to without being seen at the same time. And that's an important part of the work. But I'm excited to, at some point, get back into the studio and make just a proper album for the fun of it. Thanks.